Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to this talk about the audio and accessibility at King, specifically in our game Candy Crush Soda. Soda is the second game on the Candy franchise, released 2 years after the mobile launch on the original Candy Crush, and it includes new features like liquid physics, multi-stage levels, spawning fishes, and a bunch of floating bubbles. My name is Edu, by the way. I'm audio lead at King, and I've been working in the industry for about 19 years now, half of them at King, luckily. Before jumping into details, let me do a quick introduction on accessibility and inclusive design here at King. Over these years, I've had the chance to do many different things at King related to my craft, but I never got to work on accessibility features, so I was very curious and excited about this project right away from the start. As soon as I started working on the project, I asked myself, okay, so what's in there regarding accessibility in the company? Because I knew there were some initiatives, but I never kind of like deep dived into it. So the first thing that I found is that this big comprehensive document, the King's Mobile Accessibility Guidelines, where you have a list of many different accessibility topics sorted by the categories you see here on this slide. Inside each guideline category, we find a series of items, each one evaluated on risk and effort, and with a final recommendation. So for example, if you take one of the vision guidelines, could be ensure that players can read all the in-game text. This should be evaluated as high risk because players need to know what they need to do by reading it. Low effort because it's quite simple for an artist to fix it. And then with a final recommendation, which would be something like use this font size for plain text, use this other font size for bold text, use these colors, etc. So what's great about this document is that teams use this document when they start designing a feature and not afterwards as an afterthought. So accessibility is something that it's kind of like embedded right away from the get-go. Okay, so who did this big document? The Gators did. And the Gators are basically people that gather together to try to pull all of the accessibility and inclusion initiatives into one common place so that there was global visibility on everything happening on this regard across the company. The Gators don't just focus on accessibility, but also on inclusive design. You can read some of the principles on this slide, but in summary, our goal is to make the most inclusive mobile games ever. Also, for the game that we are discussing today, Candy Crush Soda, there is an additional 30 pages doc on accessibility and inclusive design with a specific info on game assets exclusive for the game. And this document borrows some points from the King's Mobile Accessibility Guidelines that I talked about, and also from Microsoft Inclusive Design Framework. So we have a global document, a dedicated global team pushing for the accessibility initiatives, and also a specific document for this game. I soon began to realize that the accessibility was already well established across the company at a broad level. Okay, so let's move on to the specific work we did for the new audio settings page. So first of all, we wanted to understand what are the most common auditory disabilities and sensitivities, and we came up with this list. The most common auditory impairment or hearing loss, pretty common. It can happen in both ears or just one ear. Hyperacusis, which is when individuals have a collapsed tolerance to environmental sound, so they need to quite a really specific audio level for them not to be distracted or annoyed. Tinnitus, ringing or other noises in one or both of your ears, which isn't caused by external sound but can be triggered by stress or fatigue. Misophonia, which is a discomfort of hearing certain type of sounds. Here the classic example is chewing sounds. And then variable sensitivity across the frequency range of human hearing. Of course, we're all different, and some people are more annoyed by the low frequencies, some other find high frequencies or mid frequencies a bit more jarring. So with knowing that we had all of these auditory disabilities and sensitivities, with those in mind, we decided to change and actually create a specific audio settings page for the games. Previous audio settings were pretty much toggles, as you will see on the next slide. There it is. This is the old settings menu. All of the options, not just audio, were there on a single space, and we only have toggles to turn off, on and off music and sounds separately. And this is the new audio settings for the game. They sit on a dedicated tab on the settings menu, and on the general tab, which you don't see here, you can find some other options related to visual effects, colors, haptics, etc. Okay, so let's see what we added in here, all of these controls. Music and sound effects volume sliders. Of course, you can now fine-tune and find the right amount of dBs for each one of these two channels. Mono audio, which would make the sound come out of both speakers equally. Balance, which will allow you to position it on the left and right headphones or even speakers if you're using them. By the way, there's a bunch of mobile devices and tablets nowadays that are stereo. Bass control, which will allow you to control the bass frequencies, and high-pitched sounds, which would act on the higher frequency spectrum. All of this all of these controls could be linked to some of the disabilities and sensitivities that we talked at the beginning. For example, the sliders for music and sounds would be useful for misophonia or hyperacusis. The mono audio, which would be really useful if you don't hear well on one of your ears, and the same for the balance, you would be able to compensate, and the bass control and the high-pitched sounds for those people who are sensitive to certain frequency ranges, etc. But again, once you add all of these options in the game, what we find is that a bunch of players which are not players with any disability or sensitivity are using it to customize it to their needs. So for the bass and high-pitched sounds sliders, we needed to come up with the frequencies that these controls would operate with. And what you see up here is the result of a testing session with some members of the audio team, writing down the frequencies and values that worked for the devices they had when we were working from home. This is just one of the tests. Afterwards, we went to the Barcelona offices and we coordinated with our QA pips to get access to many different devices. Oppo, Xiaomi, Huawei, Google, more Apple devices. And in general, we realized that we needed quite extreme ranges and values. The bass, those two sets of frequencies that we came up with, they fall a lot into the mid-range anyway, because a tiny speaker that you find on a device cannot go either very low or very high. Okay, so here you have a visual representation of what's going on when you drag those faders. So if you take a look at the bottom right, you'll see that I've pushed the bass too high and I've reduced the high-pitched sounds to low. And this is the on the left you see the EQ response. Basically for the bass, I think that we ended up using 300 Hertz, and for the high pitch sounds it's controlling two different frequencies, because we saw that these frequencies were something that we found on many different devices. So instead of going for a wider queue and dampened a bunch of frequencies, we were a bit more selective finding those two pieces. Okay, and this is a demo of the menu in action. Cool. And then for the fun part, once we had something close to final, we tested the menu with players with disabilities. This happened in Stockholm in February, and it's a pity that I couldn't be there at the time, because I it would have been great for me to see the reactions in real time, but my buddies really did a great job there, providing all the necessary support and gathering all of their insights. The tests were done with headphones, by the way. This is the participant roster, 2 of them with ADHD, 3 using hearing aids, 1 of them deafness in one of his ears, and 2 of them having hearing sensitivities. 1 participant has tinnitus. So what did we get out of this test? Detailed descriptions. Some users wanted more specific information about what the controls were doing. But we wanted to keep everything under one non-scrollable tab, so we went for as simple as possible control names. The action point here was to add a tooltip for the mono control, which was the one players had the most troubles understanding. But this we already added into the new version that we released. And then update the high frequencies wording. Yeah, so based on this feedback, we changed the name of the control because initially it was called high frequencies. And then we changed it to high-pitched sounds, which made it a bit more understandable. We also unified the slider behavior, making it work exactly as the base control so that they both work the same way. Direct access from the menu to the switcher. This is planned for our next iteration. And increase the font size. Yes, we took care of this and we increased it a little bit, and it was there on the release on May. So more recommendations around granularity. Additional slider or toggle for voices. Yeah, we realized that voices in this game might be considered a temp disability. So imagine that you're walking on a dark alley at night, and you hear something like that.
Juicy.
Okay, so you can see that these voices can be somehow, you don't want them to be playing all the time, and depending on the situation, it might be that they also might be a bit disturbing if you're playing, I don't know, on the tube or something like that. So we took note, and on our next iteration, we will add a toggle for muting those music, or even a slider to be able to control the sound separately, because otherwise people might just like quit the mute the audio completely, or what's worse, quit the game because they cannot play due to these voices. Yeah, more variety in music and voices. This we took care of it with the audio revamp that happened in November last year. So we went basically from 3 minutes of music to something close to 30 minutes. And add a reset button to make the audio settings go back to the initial ones. Yes, we took care of this, and we added it for our first iteration last year. Overall, I would say that the players were really excited to see the new menu and options that were available for them. They also found the controls easy to tweak. They didn't have any problem with the UX and the UI. Yeah, I can only say that even for me, like now I always play with those controls turned on. Like for example, on the device, on my Samsung device, I always play with bass control all the way up. But on my tablet, I reduce the high frequencies because it's a bit more jarring. So what we were saying before about accessibility options are actually options for all of the players. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. I want to end the presentation by saying that this sort of menu that we implemented is not uncommon on PC and console games, but they are actually really rare on casual mobiles. So even if we did this with accessibility in mind and to allow for more audio customization overall for all of our players, at the same time we're kind of like separating ourselves from our competition and providing a product which offers more polish, more features, and more care for our user base, which is of course a really nice side effect to have, don't you think? Okay, So that's it, and now happy to answer any questions you might have in Discord. Bye bye, guys.